Okay, are we ready? All right, super. Great.
You should speak up because the air conditioner's on in the home.
Thank you. All right, we will go ahead and call to order the Olivos Community Services District meeting, regular meeting of August 13th at 6 p.m.
President Kennedy.
Here.
Vice President Palmer.
Here.
Director Fayram. Here. Director Parks. Here. And remotely, Director Nelson.
Here.
Okay, get everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. All right, next up, public comment. Is there anyone that would like to address the board about something not on the agenda?
Catherine Rohr. And I realize the board is set on the 5-mile pipeline to connect to the Solvang sewer plant, arguably choosing the least local solution to a small local problem, and definitely eliminating the option of recharging the groundwater here in and around Los Olivos, which has been one of the big selling points for the creation of a local agency to devise a local solution. But what I really want to speak to is the board's lack of interest in working with the Dunn School, which reached out repeatedly and earnestly to offer 5 or more acres of their land for a local treatment option. The 2 big reasons I've heard from the board are: 1, Dunn arrived too late on the scene, and it made its generous offer way too late in the game, and that's somehow Dunn's fault. And 2, according to Guy Savage and occasionally Mary Hayden, the Dunn School's parents, I'm one of them, and neighbors wouldn't want a gigantic, stinky sewage treatment plant right next to them. And so I'd like to try to correct the record on both of those fronts. As to timing, it looks to me like back in January 2023, Jane Gray, chair of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, recommended that then President Tom Fayram reach out to Dunn. Specifically, over 2.5 years ago, the Water Board chair told Tom Fayram that working with Dunn, and I quote, might help to offset costs for the community and is a more attractive project for any funding agency. This is your project, so why didn't you reach out to Dunn in a timely manner? As to the plans to build a giant stinky sewage treatment plant that Dunn families and neighbors would not accept. The whole plan was to build a treatment facility that would not be stinky and disgusting. That's what you told us back when you were pursuing a local solution by creating a system for this bullseye of the small downtown lots. So was it true that the local option you promoted up to about 2022 wasn't going to be stinky and awful, or not? Beyond that, if there's a single property owner in all of the Santa Ynez Valley that has successfully installed an on-site treatment facility without odors and other hazards, it's the Dunn School. Their treatment facility is underground. It's been in operation for around a decade. It's located right by the school's sports fields and its middle school classrooms. It isn't remotely stinky or awful. And it could and should be a great local resource for the LOCSD's efforts to identify cleaner, safer, smaller, cheaper collection and treatment options. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board about something not on the agenda? Anyone on the line? Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move on then to consent agenda. Did I pass that on?
I'm fine.
Sorry.
I have nothing to report at this time. We're going to talk about everything tonight. So.
Thank you. All right, now we're on number 6, the consent agenda. First off, do we have any public comment regarding the consent agenda?
Chair, if I may, real quick. Just want to note that the county did go live with its new financial system earlier this month, which the system's called Workday.
Excuse me.
I had my hand raised and no one called on me, and I tried to unmute myself, but wasn't able to do it until now. May I make a public comment?
I didn't see your hand up.
But we'll allow it.
Okay,
Is this on the agenda or is this general public comment?
general public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good evening, board members. Sorry about that. I raised my hand in the middle of Catherine's speech. By the way, I completely agree with everything that she just said. And I would just like to caution you that, you're looking at a Proposition 218 vote. You're hoping in the next, I don't know, year and a half. And I don't think you have the community on board behind you. You cannot say that you've got the community on board behind you if you only have 40 people or 45 people that show up at a meeting, and you need to have, 300 plus property owners vote. I think that when people actually get a ballot in the mail and they see the price tag, they are going to flip out if they also think that they are going to be connected to Solvang and development is going to run rapid, which is, I think, where you're headed toward. At least that's what you think you want. I don't think that's what the rest of Los Olivos wants. So I would just urge you to kind of tap the brakes. Mark Herthel is, and Polo was looking at putting together all of the information needed to compare the system that you guys have your eyes set on right now versus an alternative that they suspect is going to be less expensive for the property owners. And I think that you should just wait and see what they have to say before you try to move ahead with anything. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, coming back to consent agenda.
So I was just noting that the county went live with its new financial system Workday earlier this month. There's an agenda item that we'll talk about in just a minute that could affect who pays our bills, but either way, bill payment of the invoices will be a little delayed just as we get kind of reoriented around that new system. It's a fairly standard system, web-based, and it looks to be able to support processes like we've been supporting all along. I don't see huge change necessarily other than it's a different system and we have to learn how to use the buttons on this new system compared to the old buttons we used to have before. So you'll see when I get to the financial reports that I just included last month's because I don't have the current months.
All right, do we have any public comment on this item? Yeah.
No.
All right, can we get a motion?
I'll move we approve the consent agenda presented.
All right, we have a first and a second. It will be roll call.
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Correct. This will be a roll call since Director Nelson is attending remotely.
Director Palmer?
Aye.
Director Parks?
Aye.
Director Fayron?
Aye.
President Kennedy?
Aye.
Director Nelson?
Aye.
Okay, moving on, next item on the agenda is the consideration of a contract with Civic Sol Accounting.
Right, so this is the item I was just referring to. Civic Sol Accounting is one of two firms that I found that are familiar with Workday and do processing of accounts payable primarily in our local area. I found different individual accountants that I could at least talk to and have them consider being our accountant. Most of them said no because we're kind of a 3, maybe 5 hours a month sort of an operation. And the overheads related to them doing that kind of work is just too great. I got a quote from one of them who said, yeah, I'll do it for a retainer of $800 and that'll cover the first 6 hours of your efforts. And I said, well, we don't even have 6 hours most months, so it'd be basically an $800 bill. Another one said, yeah, I'll give you an hourly quote, never called me back. Or reached out, I should say, to 3 people who are in the valley, 2 of which actually were their services to provide accounting. So came to settle on Civic Sol. Civic Sol is made up of former county employees who left the county some time ago, one of whom actually when the county tried to first go live with Workday was the lead on the county system, so he knows Workday quite well. So you've got a contract in front of you. I'll note that the contract amount per hour versus what they originally quoted did go up a little bit. They had new rates they implemented, so it's $110 an hour. They're ready to start. One of the kind of subtle benefits of going with Civic Sol is, if, for instance, we stick with M&S. By the way, I've had some great conversations with M&S, and I want to thank them for what they've been doing thus far. Doing accounts payable was just one of the areas of doing it, but it's not really her typical job. She does a lot of other things. This is something she took on. So thanks again to Mary for doing that. I think it's a good time to do it, new system, and by using Civic Sol, we wouldn't have to pay Mary some 20 hours to get trained on the new system. Civic Sol could start as soon as we have a contract ready to go. So lots of good reasons, I think, to do it at this point. So that's my recommendation, that you approve a contract. Civic Sol, it doesn't have a not to exceed because it's an hourly contract.
Okay.
Council has reviewed and approved the contract.
I'll just add that the finance committee also did look at this in our meeting last week as well. First start out, if there's any public comment on this item?
Seeing that.
Seeing none. Okay, bring it back to the board. Any questions regarding comment or contract or comments? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to echo what Mr. Savage said. I even sent a note some months ago to M&S, knowing what Mary has done for this district since day one and the work she's done. So again, I think I echo what Mr. Savage said. There's no reflection on M&S or Mary. So appreciative, but this does look like a smart way to go. Again, thank you to Mary in particular for her diligent good work for us.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, Doug, and when we first did this up, and then asked for the shop help us get started. We evolved to mature. We now employ you for your critical expertise.
We discussed this change and we agree this is a good move for the district.
Nothing further. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Again, we'll do a roll call vote.
I'll second.
Director Fairman, Director Parks. I'm sorry, Director Palmer.
Aye.
Director Parks.
Aye.
President Kennedy.
Aye.
Director Nelson.
Aye.
Okay, great. So, will they then be starting pretty
Immediately.
Okay, super, that's great. All right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the discussion of possible Proposition 218 assessment approaches.
All right, so I'm going to bring up the presentation in just a minute. Presentation's on the website. If you don't have it or can't get it through Zoom in an easy way, I'll be walking through it, starting with the assessment part. There's a bit in there about the RFP that I'll cover just briefly later. I want to emphasize before we get started with this conversation that I expect this to be the first of many conversations. This isn't the final conversation. My whole intent with this presentation is really just to kind of get everybody's juices flowing to thinking about how to do this sort of stuff. And so we can have some more conversations in the future about it. So with that, let me share my screen. A second here. All right, so just as a way of a reminder, what is an assessment? Basically, it's a services fee levied on properties to pay for some public improvement or a service that benefits property. Now, I want to emphasize this because this is kind of a subtlety that often gets missed when you talk about Prop 218s and what we're going to assess. I'm really focused tonight on construction assessment, which is different than a Prop 218 service rate assessment that you guys will be talking about in the future. So you've got to separate those two, because some of the things that you'll often think about as part of construction assessment probably really aren't applicable. They're more applicable when we get to the service, monthly annual charge side of things. These assessments are different from other things that are on your property bill, such as parcel taxes, that sort of stuff. Some other bond that you've approved, that sort of thing. Unlike our current fee that our special tax, this will apply to all parcels. Nobody gets exempted from this. Today, for instance, we exempt the churches and a couple other organizations. Everybody pays this one, no discounts, no exemptions. Okay, so all parcels, not just the 700 or 373 that we currently add the special tax to, will pay this. Again, current focus is on construction assessment. We'll have a separate conversation in the future about rates and the assessments related to rates. That will include all the costs for operations and maintenance, and that's an additional vote, separate process. So put your mind on the discussion around construction only if you can. All right, so I put the word usual in this next slide because the reality is other than having an assessment engineer, I can say that word, do the actual calculations that's required by law. There really is no step 1 through 5 kind of thing. Instead, this is the way most jurisdictions go about it. That's why I put this in quotes and say the usual process. So the board tonight, in future meetings, the public are going to consider how do we fairly and equitably distribute assessments to properties, right? What are the things about a parcel that you want to share these costs based on? And I'll get to some examples in just a minute. You always hire an assessment engineer, and that's required. That's not an option. You must do that. They take into consideration all the things that you said, hey, we'd like to assess in this way, or this way, or this way. They'll give you feedback in detail on what does that look like in the actual models that are produced. You then hold a 218 vote, right? And then if the vote is successful, you add that assessment. Since we're talking construction assessment, it'll be basically on your annual property tax bill. Services might be paid either on your tax bill or in some other fashion, but again, we're talking about construction here. I want to be very clear about that. All right, so how do you determine those charges, those assessments that you're going to place on parcels? Well, first of all, they have to be tied to a specific benefit that the parcel receives. They can be simple or they can be complex, okay? The assessment engineer that we hired from ND5 and his report and things are posted on the website as well, said to us, look, the easiest one and most straightforward one to use is parcel size because it doesn't change. And, that's the easiest one to do. Now, we all know, and we've talked about in the past, that's not always fair. There are a number of parcels, for instance, that are larger than the Grand Hotel. Should they be paying more of an assessment than the Grand Hotel? Well, I think most people would say probably not, because they're not as big a user. They don't receive as big a benefit from a sewer as, say, the Grand Hotel does. So that's kind of on the simple side of things, and I'll show you some more of those kind of simpler ones in just a minute. I'll also talk about some of the more complex ones. You can also use what you might call fixed components, like, again, parcel size is something that's fixed, and some variable things. Now, variable things tend to come into play a little bit more when you're talking about the annual service fees, because things like water use changes pretty much every year, right? Now, you might have a band that you're going to people to, but, water inflow means sewer outflow. So, some of those components will change over time. And so you need to be careful about selecting anything that might change. And that's really what the last bullet is getting at. Things that change over time for your construction assessment, you probably want to think really hard about, do you want to use that as a mechanism to charge your assessment for construction? Rate charges, those make a lot of sense, right? Water flow equals outflow, other things that might change pretty readily. Probably don't want to include in your construction assessment, but definitely might want to consider them in your rate assessment. So other things that, and you'll see some of these in just a minute, but other things that are a little more on the simple side that might change, things like zoning. You know, zoning is set today, but it could change over time. So we'll talk about each of those in just a couple of minutes. Ultimately, the assessment engineer does the calculations, and again, you can see the crazy spreadsheet on the website that basically documents what the calculation is and what the expected payment, expense, cost, whatever you want to call it, is to each parcel home. Okay, so here's a couple of examples that I would consider on the simpler side. Now, lot size, which is what the assessment engineer from NV5 talked about previously, you know, that one doesn't change. Your lot size is your lot size. Now, yes, you can split a lot, you can combine a couple of lots, but you're doing simple math then, right? It's pretty easy to do that now. Zoning and use can change over time, but tends to be a little more stable. So, you know, is it residentially zoned? Is it commercially zoned? If it's commercially zoned, within the commercial zone, how's it being used? Is it the Grand Hotel or Maddie's Tavern? Or is it a wine tasting room that might be selling wine in the future or some other thing in the future? So, you know, you can use some of those. Is it a school? Well, those uses don't tend to change as far as the core of the school. Now, those might change during the year and so on. And then things like churches and halls or other nonprofits, we've got a couple of those. So all things, again, just consider. So I'm putting these out there to just kind of get your brain thinking about things that you might want to consider. On the more complex, so I'm sliding into some examples now of some things that might be a little more complex. So you can base it on things like system components, like you know, different hybrid designs. Let's say, I'll just make it up. I'm not saying this is where we'll go, but I'll just make it up. If the west side of the district, dividing that by the creek, is on effluent, well, there's different components on that side than, let's say, the east side if it's on gravity. And you can base an assessment based on that, right? Because each place has different components, and you can say, oh, I'm going to allocate X number of effluent components to a house and X number of effluent components to a church or whatever, okay? So you can do that sort of thing. You can also look at tanks, the tank size, because often that is something that might lead you down a size of, well, how much sewage are they going to be producing? And then with effluent systems, well, there is this conversation you can have about, well, you've got two different effluent strengths, right? The sewage strength coming out of an effluent system is lower because those solids are gathered in the tank versus an old-fashioned gravity sewer where it's anything that gets flushed comes down the sewer pipe. So you can look at some of those as well. I put in here lateral turnouts, and there's an example that I attached to the agenda and is also called out separately with tonight's agenda from the community of Los Osos. Los Osos it still has a number of vacant lots. And one of the things they grappled with is, well, how do you treat a vacant lot, regardless of how it's zoned, but in their case, most of them were zoned residential, versus a residential house that's already been built on. We do have a couple of residential lots that are vacant. The board may say, you know what, we don't care. There's not enough of them to worry about. It's up to you. In Los Osos, they also had some very large parcels that could end up being, you know, 6, 8, 10, 20 homes. So it was a little bit different calculation and sort of thing that they had to go through, as opposed to, you know, the few lots that we have that are vacant that could be constructed on them. Another system component you could consider, I'm sorry, let me go back to lateral turnout. Just to be clear, what I'm talking about there is you have a sewer main, right? And you have a lateral line that's just stubbed out. That's essentially what I mean by a turnout. You add a connection point to the sewer main for a parcel or a set of parcels. Where you have low-lying parcels, you could consider adding an additional component related to, you know, if they have to have their own mini pump and grinder system or lift station to get from, you know, 3 low-lying parcels to help lift the sewage up to the main line. The advantage of doing such a thing is, you know, then you don't have to dig everything quite so deep, right? So there's these trade-offs you're going to be making, both with design and with this assessment approach. Moving then to things that are a little bit harder, things like fixture units, you can use those. if you want in your construction assessment, things like showers, how many showers does somebody have, how many toilets, how many sinks, and so on. Those tend to change over time though, right? Somebody adds a bathroom, adds, an extra sink. Often hard to track those. It's easy to understand what's permitted through the county. But if a sink gets added that's not permitted, well, how do you find out about that? And so now we're beginning to slide, as I get into some of these more complex examples, into things that you can consider them. I think an assessment engineer might try and push you away from ones like fixture units just because things can get a little more dicey because they change so readily and they're harder to count over time. And then last but not least, certainly you can do some things around calculated flows because it does drive pipe size, right? If I need I'll just say a 2-inch, I don't know what the size would be, maybe it's 3-inch, 2.5-inch pipe from my house as a residential home, because I'm just a residential home as opposed to a business that's on the same size lot, they might need a 4-inch or a 5-inch, right? So because of the amount of flow they're pushing out into the sewer main, you can look at that. And may not be all bad to consider, but again, things that tend to drive the cost are the things you want to look at. Things that stay as stable as possible over time, also things you want to look at. So with that, again, just try to get your brain around some things you can consider. I don't anticipate this being the final conversation. I expect to take it up some more. I think some of the things that you are probably thinking about include things like, well, how do we deal with ADUs, right? How do we deal with somebody who's renting their home? How do we deal with an ADU that's being rented where the person lives in the house themselves full time? A lot of those are probably better left for your annual service rates, right? Because, oh, I'm renting it out my ADU this year, now I'm not renting it out anymore. So those tend to be the kind of changes you're going to want to leave for your annual fee as opposed to your construction assessment rate. Now, that doesn't mean that house or the size of that house in ADU couldn't be considered, right? The square footage being built, you could certainly consider that. An ADU plus a house might need a bigger pipe, right? Like the example I've got on here. So you can consider them maybe in other ways than maybe you originally thought, right? It's not about, is it rented or not? It's about, does it have an ADU or does it have the capacity to have an ADU, right? California law tells us a lot of things about what can be built on properties. But the reality is some parcels, just because of setbacks and everything else, couldn't build a full 1,200 square foot ADU without tearing down the existing house or doing some serious construction to make it happen. Whereas other lots, they could plunk them down, wouldn't really notice. So some of those come back into that conversation that we started with parcel size. Remember, parcel size does kind of reflect potential for building, right? I have a small parcel, there's only so much I can build on it. If I have a very large parcel, I can build more, right? So again, all things to consider as you think through this. By way of resources, just so you know they're out there, and again, this presentation is posted. The preliminary assessment approach NV5 developed for us, there's a link for that. The assessment engineers report from the community of Los Osos is posted out there. Cayucas, another community to the north of us, we don't have their assessment engineers report. We have a rate assessment, which is different, right? Again, not construction, that's services rate. I threw another link in here to the guide to Prop 218, just because people get it confused all the time and what we're up to, and I just want to make sure I keep providing that to people. And then Director Palmer sent me an interesting link when she knew we were going to be talking about this, to kind of different approaches to kind of help you think through some of this. I think I've touched on many of them here, but just know that, if you want to read yet another person's kind of view of how to do these, there's a link to that one there. Again, be really careful when you're doing some of this research because many of the assessments that you see and the rate structures you'll see posted have to do with services, not construction. The number, other than Los Osos, I wasn't able to find a current assessment engineer's report except for Los Osos, which isn't that current anymore. I have spoken to 2 other jurisdictions, but interestingly, they're struggling to come up with what they, exactly how they did. I asked them for their assessment report. They've got one, but, you know, things have shifted over time. You know, they did the original one, and kind of like some of the things we were talking about earlier, you know, they started off with A, and then it went to B, and now they're in C. And so to draw a clear line for you to say, okay, this is how it's all done, they have to give you this whole table of, oh, here's property 213, and here's property 575, and that's how that one's done. It just gets confusing in a hurry. So I'm tempted to just give you their original assessment reports, but I'm also hesitant just because they're not necessarily the best example, because things shifted on them pretty quickly over time. So as I get them, I'll share them with you in the public in the same way I've shared these, just so you have them as resources to look at and ask questions. So with that, my presentation.
We'll take public comment and then we can bring it back to the board. So, okay. So,
I just, I'm gonna admit, I might just be thick-headed, I'm not fully appreciating the distinction here between, the fee assessment and the construction assessment, but I think, for purposes of my comment, which actually reflects the comments of many people here actually in your voting block. So, people are very concerned that if any of this is based on the build-out potential of a parcel, that it will drive and encourage, and virtually for some parcels require development in order to be able to participate, where people will have to sell and move. So anything that's about the potential, if we look at something like Montanaro, which is a huge open space that is not contributing to your groundwater problem, it is the opposite. If the water is being cleaned as it flows under Montanaro, which has absolutely no contributing factors. So to burden parcels like that, or like PacDot's agricultural parcel on the other side of town, based on what could be built there theoretically, is so grossly unjust. And you will get pushback across the board, not just from me. And then I also want to touch on the idea that folks on smaller parcels have very different concerns and potential than those on larger parcels. And that's true for board members, and it's true for community members. And I want you, as you think this through, to just always please try to remember to be objective. And it's not just what will benefit you and the way your individual parcel is configured, has sometimes come up in these meetings, but as how it will affect people who are on large parcels, have fabulously functioning systems, are over monitoring wells that aren't showing elevated nitrates, and to burden them with the cost of this project is going to be a tricky sale. So, thanks.
thank you. Any other public comment in the room? Anyone online?
Yeah, we got.
Okay, Anna Marie, go ahead.
Good evening, board members. So I would just like to reiterate some of Catherine's comments. As you know, I do think that people are going to get sticker shock if you go with an assessment that they don't think is equitable. And again, something that they feel that is going to induce growth and be more costly than an alternative. She gave an example of my mom's property over on Santa Barbara. You know, she's got a barn, it's got some fencing, and there's, I think, tomatillos planted. So that's a very different use right now, even though it is now zoned residential. It has been historically used as ag for as long as my parents have owned the property. On the other hand, you have properties right down in Los Olivos that are almost completely built out like Fess Parkers. That is 100% commercial use, has a ton of fixtures in it, has tremendous revenue. You know, my mom isn't deriving any real revenue from those ag parcels. She's not deriving some huge amount of revenue from her rental. You know, those are just completely different things. One is residential use. They're not, you know, there is not a bed and breakfast being run out of the home. There is not a short-term vacation rental on the property. It is for someone to live in and use as a home. People are really going to push back if they don't see the rates reflective of the actual use and the size. And when I mean size, I mean the square footage of the home as well as fixture counts. And that's the number of bathrooms, the number of kitchens and showers and everything else, on the property. So I would really, push you towards going with a more complex and equitable, schedule when you guys are looking at how you want to lay this out for the future and how people are going to have to be paying on an annual or, monthly basis for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll go ahead and bring it back to the board for discussion, or we want to provide General Manager Savage with further direction and assistance in determining.
We'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and thanks, Guy, for bringing this forward. And yeah, I do appreciate it. It's there's not a decision to be made here, but we need to start thinking about this. I've been thinking about this, for a long time, and there's a lot of tough issues that we have to consider. If a parcel is vacant now, but it would be built on later, how do we handle it? I guess out of the gate, every parcel has to be assessed, whatever that is, whether it's vacant or not, because we're going to have to build a system and purchase capacity, and each parcel has to pay their share. You talk about equity. I'm not going to pay for the vacant property on Montanaro, and then it is sold, and then it is built, and then you can't recover that. And maybe that's a question. I might have a couple of questions for council that you don't have to answer now, but you can think about. When we have the vote, I don't know that you can readjust it after the fact and go back and capture that if you leave the gotten property or something that's currently in ag, but is not zoned ag, I don't believe, and then is converted. How do you go back and then recapture that? I don't know that there's a way that you do that. If there's a zoning change, you might be able to do that, but if there's not a zoning change, I don't know how you can do that. I think Guy mentioned the parcel size and NV5. That was a very high level. I don't think anybody thought it was just going to be based on parcel size. That's just not going to fly for the reasons that Mr. Savage talked about. We've got two basic uses. We've got residential and commercial, and I see those as having two different formulas for how that's going to be used, because obviously the hotel and restaurants are going to use more than residential parcel does. Another question for council to think about, not necessarily to respond to now, but one of the things that I've thought about is the idea of all of these parcels having an allocation. In other words, you're going to have to buy into not only the collection and transmission system, but then also in the treatment system. And from an equity standpoint, based on what the zoning and the sizes, we could probably come up with an allocation that's what they paid for. And if they exceeded that allocation, then there'd have to be, I don't know what that would entail, whether it's you can't do it, whether you acquire someone else's allocation, or what it can be. But here's the other problem to get around. I understand the problem about, well, do we just assess every commercial parcel to its full potential? Well, yeah, if you do that, then the price goes up and everything else goes up. But if we don't, then, and that development happens anyway, then what happens when you get notification from the regional board that you don't have you don't have the capacity we bought into the solving? So those are some issues we need to think about. Maybe that's not a big issue, but I think we should think about it. So the allocation approach. The other unfinished work, and we've been talking to the county about this now for, I guess, a couple of years, and we need to ramp up that effort, is when there is a development, I'm thinking mostly in the commercial area. There are commercial properties that are currently used for residential, and that changes to a commercial use. Does the county come to us, or like basically would be Ken Wilson, that would allow us then to somehow do a true up or something that would be more equitable? The initial answer from the county was, well, I don't think so, because if it's already served, it's already served. But we've got a small collection of lots, a small system. And so that is a bigger deal for us. So we do need to continue that discussion with the county. And then on the ADUs, and that's another issue we need to think about. How do we assume how many parcels would have an ADU and how many wouldn't, and how do you make that, how is that equitable? Is that something that can happen after the fact? Can we assess an additional system, not treatment, but system fee that then presumably could be then offset others? Or is it just what it is and they benefit from that? We need to think about how that, if I don't put in an ADU and my neighbor does, then who pays for the system capacity and treatment for that? Treatment we could probably handle, but the upfront system capacity. And there's probably no perfect answer, and you have to do the best you can, but these are some of the variables that I'm thinking about. And maybe as time goes on, Mr. Savage, we could talk to others. That we can't be the first one that's had to deal with this. But I do know other systems, like if you look at Goleta Sanitary, well, they're a huge system. They've got a huge established system, and so each one of these are very small in the greater scheme of it. But for us, it's bigger income for us. So we need to think about how to do that. And I'm certainly all in favor of making this as equitable as possible without overdoing it to the fact that it doesn't work. I mean, you can make it worse by trying to make it too perfect, I suppose. Probably have more comments, but let's stop there.
Matt, if I may real quick, I meant to mention this when I gave my presentation, but ever so briefly, Director Kramer's comments reminded me, a lot of systems have added to their existing system. Even a community like Cayucas, who built a new plant, already had an established set of fees and had already gone through a number of things. So they didn't have a construction assessment like we're going to have. That's why there's so few of them, because there's so few communities that have built it from scratch with nothing in place. So there are lots of places building wastewater treatment facilities or added to theirs, and they do it through a different approach than what we're going to have to do. So.
And again, I'm dealing with two separate types of fees. So the construction, especially if you're looking at financing, be able to show that the income of these fees is going to pay payments on the financing. So cost of the construction is what it's going to be, and how that is all assessed is that's up. But overall, it needs to be based on benefit. What is the benefit to a particular piece of property from this system? And how that benefit is measured is what we're talking about. So we measure it at full well value, we measure it at square footage. Combination, I mean, you can assess, and I'm just swagging right now, but you can look at, okay, 50% of the assessment is based on size. The other 50% is based on usage, based on use. You have the ability to move that scale as long as it is fair and reflects the benefit in a manner that is justified and the engineer's report can assess it and calculate it. And this is where the most difficult part of setting rates, whether it's service or whether it's for construction, is having a good benefit assessment and a good engineer's report. It's crucial.
That reminds me, and again, just for something that the council maybe Mr. Savage think about. So there has to be a way too that if there are those changes that go above and beyond that we can somehow capture that. Because in effect, that's what Solvang is asking us to do, right? We're gonna use part of their system. We have to pay for that, right? We're not paying for it now, so we have to pay for that. So it seems to me that same theory has to be, or could be applied, as we have conversion or something here.
The construction is a fixed cost, and that needs to be spread at the time it's being assessed. So change of use, change of additions, that's more going to probably be applicable to the service fees, the annual fees. But your fixed cost of construction is a number. That number needs to be proportionally apportioned to all the parcels at the time that it's being apportioned.
What we have to think about though is if a project goes abnormally above what that assumption for that fixed cost was, I believe we need to be able to rectify that somehow, because they didn't pay for that. That person didn't pay for that. And if you can go to the micro level, I'm not suggesting that, but let's say we have parcels that are commercially zoned and they have a house on it with 2 people in it. Say, well, they're only using this, so we're only gonna charge them so much. Then a coffee shop or restaurant with a couple units up above come in. They didn't pay for that. So we have to reconcile how we address it. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. But from an equity standpoint, they have to pay their share. We don't want to encourage all of that, but we also have realities of that they have to pay their rightful share. And then in the treatment side of it, it's a lot easier. The annual, it's a lot easier. I mean, you can go into water use. We can get the water bill and base it off of that ultimately. But the upfront capacity allocation, that's going to be part of this.
And Mr. Savage identified, we are not on a path that has been often taken or recently taken. So that also is not the case. There are not a lot of systems out there that were just from scratch recently built where we can go look and say, okay, so how do they look at this? What was good? And assessing in addition to a system or a upsizing of a system that already exists, a whole different exercise than starting from scratch and basically aiming to say, okay, what do we do? Here's a parcel. Yeah, right now it's a single house. 5 years from now, it could be completely something else. It could be much more intensive use or much less intensive use. The other way around, business imposed. You know, lot becomes a single family residence. So, and I don't have any magic answers for you at this point in time, but those are all considerations that have to go into that. And again, you're dealing with obviously the cost is going to vary somewhat. At the end of the day, it may be more than was estimated or maybe less. But the process of it is working with a number, fixed number, and then having to account for that number on all the parcels in their current condition. Whether you think of it as, well, it's their current condition, but there's a potential to abandon it, or you apply some other methodology. I mean, this is more following the seed than anything else today. We're asking the questions. We don't have any solutions. I don't have the guidance either. But these are all things that need to be considered, need to be thought about. And we will do our research. We'll dig and look and go beyond, move forward, and trying to give you as much information, ammunition as we possibly can. And we'll do what we can to make that decision as equitable and as fair as possible, or at least for your consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing based on size is just tough. And like Catherine says, if you show Monteneros, John's, few, assess them just on size, yeah, I mean, you very well could force them to develop that. So, okay, I'm paying 500% more than the one next door to me, so then I can't afford this, so okay, let's develop, let's build some houses then. So you're gonna want to induce growth. And is there any way you can say, okay, well, if you do the assessment based on current use, but then have high fees to connect, then it's kind of doing the opposite, then you're discouraging growth to some extent. And yes, you have enough money and everything is always possible, but at least then you're discouraging growth versus kind of forcing it upon. I mean, like Monteneros, I mean, how the hell do you do it? You get based on size. Oh, that's a lot of money. Right now, it wouldn't be that much. Now, if you want, someone wants to end up wanting to get zoning change, subdividing, and all that, it's $100,000 a parcel or for each hookup. You want to do 20 hookups, sure, that's a lot of money. But I don't know where that money would go. Does it go to the bond, the loan, to pay it off? I mean, if that's what I would do, something like that, say, okay, well, that's $2 million. Okay, well, great, let's pay $2 million off of our loan, and then everybody benefits from that. Say that. I mean, I think, man, basing assessment on size is just, it's going to encourage growth. Whereas if we can figure out some way to flip that and discourage growth, it would go over a lot better.
Well, if they're not gonna develop it and want to discourage growth, they could voluntarily ask for the zoning to change, right? I don't know if they would be in favor of that, but if the argument is we're just growing tomatoes or alfalfa or whatever, and we don't want to pay these rates, I get it, change your zoning. But if you're assessed at growing tomatoes and not using something, and then all of a sudden, well, I think I will sell it to somebody, and now they are gonna build it. Then
Right, but that's
all of
gonna
us pay for that, and so.
If they're going to pay $500,000 on our loan to have that right, then they are coming in late to the party, but they are paying for that part.
But the problem is your system is gonna be sized and set up for a certain flow. And if you leave them out, then you've left them out.
Correct. So
And
then
so then how do you?
there may not be a, I mean.
So that's why I said, well, then if you're gonna take that approach, then change your zoning. Can a property transfer its development rights to an agency?
Don't believe so. And zoning is subject to the county. They come in and rezone.
They could grant a conservation easement.
Yeah,
Conservation. So there are ways if that's truly the case, but the flaw in that, and it's a critical flaw, is to say, oh, well, they're just growing alfalfa and they're not gonna take them system. But they're sitting there zoned for something other than that, and then that changes the day after. I won't support that. That's inequitable to the rest of us. It's a two-edged sword, because you're right, if you do the assessment for the potential, does that encourage the development? I don't know if that encourages it any more than getting a pass and now having the value inflated for a developer, because now they don't have to pay for that. And then they come in and utilize it, unless we can capture it back somehow. But I don't know how you capture it when.
I mean, you could make it painful enough, that you would capture it back.
But I don't think you can make it painful above what the 218 allows.
But wouldn't that be on the operational side that would be a hookup fee, and it would be on whatever schedule we come up with or on the operations and maintenance side?
Yeah, but who pays for the system capacity that's already been built?
So if I could real quick, just because this is something that you drift into that if you've never worked in local government, it's often hard to understand. You got to keep in mind that the fees you charge have to be tied to your costs. You can't make a profit, right? And so part of, I think, the Director Parks, what you're suggesting is, well, we could just charge them $1 million. Well, if you don't have $1 million worth of costs, you can't charge them $1 million to do construction. So just be aware that unlike a private business or other businesses, local government can't make a profit like that. So you could say, oh, well, we just apply it to our loan. Well, what were your costs to do that? And if you can't back it up with costs, you can't charge that.
And offer the benefit that they're receiving. They have to, that's where the difficult part of all of this is that, what do you assess as a benefit? What is the benefit that this parcel is receiving? Is it the benefit right now, right here today? Is it the benefit at build out at the current zoning? Is there a benefit at build out at any possible zoning? That's why this is not easy. And there are a lot of questions I don't have answers to. But that's why we're doing this. We're starting a conversation, and there may not be answers to those questions. And in engineering assessment, I mean that is the most important part of this. Is the engineer's report and the assessment must be done in such a manner that it does reflect what we're talking about. That and you can define the benefit in different ways, but once that's defined, that benefit has to be spread equally or equitably on all the parcels.
What happens if you build a system, capacity X, and now we're approaching that, and then all of a sudden, Monterey wants to develop, and there's not capacity in that?
That's the problem.
Do they have the right to force everything to be increased in size, which would be hugely expensive, or does the district have the right to say, no, you can't do it?
May I
That
have an
goes back-
opportunity to chime in?
He considers a project, do they come and and ask for a can and will serve? Because if we have a allocation base that says, well, this is the zoning, this is the size, this is our formula, this is what they could do, and they want to do something more, they would come to the district and you'd say, no, we'll not give you a can and will serve because you don't meet what you bought into. I don't know if that's possible or not, but that's one of my
Well, I
questions.
mean, you can't serve a project if you don't have a capacity
Yeah.
to serve. So.
May I
No.
chime in? Guy,
Go ahead.
can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. My thoughts are that we're going to have two different parts of this. One that we're talking about right now is the construction part. I presume that we're going to have some form of an ordinance or document that's going to identify the parameters for what's being done. And if it's handled with how things are at the moment when it's constructed, then the second part comes up, which is going to be the service. Anyone that changes the use or modifies the property from what it was when it was originally assessed can have a connection fee in that part of the ordinance or whatever the document would be that could resolve some of what you're talking about. That's it.
That assumes that the capacity exists to allow it to happen. So when you assess the capacity, when you assess how big is the system going to be, or what will be the capacity of the system, those are the things that you need to think about.
So I have a question on the timing. I know this is the initial discussion and I couldn't find our timeline. So when do we need to make a decision on this in order to keep moving forward with the Prop 218?
I don't have a specific timeline for you, other than to say, by the time we finish with the 90% design and we're building toward those, whatever that final cost number is, you need to have this in place if you want to keep the whole process running, right? Which is ultimately, we're trying to move two things at least at the same time. We don't want to do this in serial, right? You could wait, but then you just spend extended time.
So, and remind me what our target is on it.
The goal is 6 to 9 months from now, kind of thing. So sometime early to middle of next year.
March.
Yeah. All of March, sure.
And then are we retaining MB5 as our assessment engineer? Are we? Yeah, do we have anyone?
We do not have the assessment engineer under contract to carry this ball to the end. That's one of the ones that we talked about during budget time, that if we've got the funding to do it, we've got to get that RFP out there as well, and find an assessment engineer. There are a number of firms in the area that can do this. The number of firms that can do it well is a much smaller number.
So, because what I'm thinking is, can they basically do the modeling for us on a couple different scenarios? I mean, we have a fixed construction number. We're designing this for the capacity that we agreed on, for the number of parcels, the zoning, the potential build out, plus whatever the factors. We know what the capacity is, right? Of the system, when we were designing 90%.
That build out?
Yeah.
Well, we have the flow numbers that will be reconfirmed during the 90% design. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have that. We'll have the project costs. So I'm just thinking, or do we land on one or two or three scenarios that we want to run that model? Does that expose any flaws or show how equitable the application would be? Because I'm personally inclined at this stage for the construction to keep it simple. With the parcel size and zoning, and then when it gets to the annual that, because that's just a moment in time. That's all the information we have. We've got zoning, we know the size, we've got a system size, and we've got the benefit. Those are all, in my mind, the clearest or easiest ways to tie directly to the benefit of constructing the conveyance. When it gets to intensification or intensity of use, that's all the operational side. That's, are you a 50-room hotel or are you a 2-bedroom house?
But something to consider when you're thinking about this is what is the benefit of this system constructed to a 50-room hotel sitting on half an acre versus a 5-acre or 2-acre parcel that has maybe one house on it, or, so that also has to come into the consideration. I think that the engineer can assist us in showing different ways of assessing it. But I would recommend not working backwards. In other words, looking at scenarios and seeing how the money spreads out, and then changing the scenario. That's not what it's about. It's about assessing, identifying the benefit, and assessing the benefit.
So like two things happen. The one question that really needs to be answered is how the county would look at this and how we play into the county's approval of the project. And we've asked that question, we haven't gotten the answer yet, so we need to push on that. We've talked to supervisor's office and about that. The other that still needs to be factored in is, are we going to move forward before we have a grant? I mean, the cost is going to be a big issue. And do we want to move forward with a Prop 218 without a grant that has, this cost number? Or do we say, okay, now we know what our costs are and go into hold until we get some assistance from some of the agencies that have prompted this to happen? I've always been a proponent of we should be getting some support. I know every other entity that I know of that has done this, Los Alamos, Los Osos, have all gotten financial support.
But I think we can do that currently.
Oh, yeah, no, but I'm saying before we pull the trigger.
In a Prop 218, we're gonna need assistance.
Yeah.
If we have no grant, there's no way it's going fast.
Yeah.
There's just no way.
And
Full price, there's
easy
no way.
enough to adjust.
But if we have full grant, it'd be a lot easier to pass. They know, okay, well, it's not gonna cost that much, okay, I can afford to do it, right? That's really huge. What's the legality if say someone just, everybody, if the 218 passes, then you have to pay that assessed fee. You can't say, hey, I'm not hooking up, I'm doing my own thing. Say Montaneros, Mark said, you know what, I'm gonna build my own treatment plant right here. I'm gonna, any development I have, whatever else I have capacity, I can do it all. and I'm not paying into your system.
You can't.
Assessment is a tax assessment. It's going to be assessed on your tax bill. If it passes.
And just because it's one of those weird arcane sort of things that comes up, what would happen if you said, well, then I'm not gonna pay the tax, right? I'll pay everything but that. That would just build up over time, and eventually the county will collect
Mr. Hagan owned your properties.
Yeah.
at some point, so.
So,
There are other processes that, I think, we might see people try and do those. Bon Air will be more difficult because it's kind of in the center of the district. But if you're on one edge, one little corner, people can do things you laugh to try and get out, but they'd be doing that sooner rather than later. That's,
or like if I want to put it on site, I'll just put it on site in my backyard.
it would still be assessed.
Well, the health department will make you connect, that's the public code, there's a municipal sewer you have.
So, Director Palmer, if I could.
We could leave it up to the president to decide.
Director Palmer, if I could go back to your earlier comment, I understand, I think where you're coming from with respect to, it would be nice to see how some of this could be modeled. I don't know that we could get you to a final, but I mean, I think if you said, oh, show me what we've been, I'm just gonna make these numbers up, a residential is one, they often use the term EDU for dwelling units, right? If you look through all, a residential unit is one EDU, and we want to make all the commercial 2 EDUs based on a $40 million construction. What would that look like? I mean, we could do that based on the models that NV5 provided. You'd be nowhere near the final engineer's report, to be really clear, but if you just wanted to see, well, how does that, from a magnitude perspective, affect things? We could do that for you. But that's not the assessment engineer's final report. And to your point, I think, whether you want us to go back out now with an RFP for an assessment engineer or later, getting your selected assessment engineer on board, so to speak, will be beneficial at some point. I don't know that you need it today because you're still just trying to wrap your head around, well, what are the things we can use? But at some point, you're going to need that because they're going to tell you, yeah, you're going to divide $40 million at time of construction, and that's fixed for the life of people's parcels.
Right. Well, I would say we should come to you, President, that I would be in favor of getting an engineer. It's similar to what we did with the PIR. Go through the process, get them identified, have them at the gate so that they're ready to go. We're not burning daylight trying to. I'll let you think about the timing of that based on where do we want to have them help us get to a final position.
You said there's a couple of good ones that you know of, okay?
This engineer Pike can back me up on this. NV5, the guy who did our initial assessment, he's the go-to guy in California as far as I know. Would you concur with that? He is the guy that people like to use. He's unfortunately winding down his career. I don't know that he'll be available moving forward. But other companies, many, I might even go so far as to say most engineering firms have one person who does this at least part-time. So they are out there. I mean, for instance, I talked to Will Clemens, who's the current general manager for Cayuga Sanitary earlier today. The guy that they're using is somebody from WSC, who did the pipelines for us. So WSC's done it. I think Mr. Pike's done it in the past. Stantec has somebody. Wallace Group has somebody. All these major engineering firms have somebody that's done this at least part-time, meaning it's not their full-time job, because it's not a full-time job. There's not enough to do. So they're out there, I guess is all I'm getting at. NV5 is kind of the premier one, but lots of firms who do it.
Well, I would check with him.
Yeah.
See either he'll stay with us or if he's willing to practice over to someone or refer you.
I'm having trouble a little bit hearing you. Can you speak up just a
I'm
little
just
bit?
saying NV5, I would follow up with him.
I
Just to
can't.
see if he's willing to do it or who he's referring or turning his practice over to.
I'd certainly like to hear from NV5, but this is big enough that we might want to see who else and entertain some.
If we ask put out like for bids or something, maybe they could give us some summary sheet
Request for proposals.
Maybe,
of how they would look at it, and then we can look at how everybody else would look at it, and then maybe we could have a fresh eyes, anyway, just kind of give a little free advice from their proposals possibly.
Maybe what we could, if I could, instead of going straight to getting proposals, that we go out for requests for qualifications, which is a much simpler, easier to find out who has done this, how many have you done, and then you look at, are you available, and then you look at those, and then you ask for proposals from a narrow slate of that. Instead of asking for 50 proposals, one that's not fair to those 50 consultants. Whereas a request for qualifications, they probably have that on their print button, and then really go from there. And we can start doing that now.
Yeah.
Well, and Doug, I'd be curious to know who was in that process when we selected that B5 too.
You know, it's a similar process. And
Were there other qualified?
yeah, there's a list of criteria that you put in the RFQ. It's always good to get someone that is some broad range of local. In other words, they understand California procedures and costs. You wouldn't want anybody out of state. You wouldn't want anybody that's far off the coast like the Central Valley. But the assessment engineers all know each other because there's that few. But there are some very good ones out there, and there's some that have broken out as exceptional. That you know, you'll see the qualifications come back and they'll become obvious very quickly. I think that's a really good idea to ask for qualifications first, and then narrow the dozen down to 3. And negotiate with 3 proposals.
So through kind of the nods and the commentary, I'll certainly follow up with the NP5 as direction to staff. I think we're comfortable with that. I just remind the board that this is not something we budgeted for. This is one of the areas that we said we're going to be short on budget, and based on what NP5 charges for the preliminary assessment report, we don't have the funding to do this at this time in the current fiscal year budget. Not if we do everything else we've done.
But we could start the RFQ.
Certainly could.
And be ready to go. That's true.
I just don't want you to think, oh yeah, we can just do all this. Hold on a minute. Part of my rules,
Understand.
give me pause.
We've done 2 of those RFQs already, so yes, let's start.
All right, do we have anything else? Director Savage or Manager, do you have enough direction here? Sorry.
I wasn't really looking, I mean, I've got some direction
Okay.
to follow up with NP5 just to see where they're at and whether or not they're still around, what they're doing from an assessment engineering perspective. I can start the RFP process. Quite honestly, like many other things, I'm going to be careful about that. I'm not going to do it tomorrow because we have polling people we're talking to. We've got communications folks we're talking to. We've got a 90% design RFP. All of that is more than eating up the hours that I have allocated in any given month. So it'll be added right at the top of the stack with everything else. So just know that when I'm not, don't probably have a whole lot for you next month. Don't work that.
All right. Well, I'm going to propose it to the other members of the board, given the importance of this. Should we have? I mean, it feels like we should have this on our next. As an agenda item on our next meeting. We need to keep continuing the conversation. Anybody just
That hurts now on the agenda.
okay.
Better research a little more.
Right.
Research research how the people have done it this budget.
Exactly. Okay. All right, then I think exhaust that one for tonight. Next up on our agenda then is the informational items. Oh, I should ask Director Nelson, do you have anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
He's unmuted.
Okay.
I can, it's hard to hear.
Right,
Um,
I
I
Liz,
didn't,
probably didn't.
I didn't catch it.
Anything else that you wanted to add before we move on?
No, nothing.
All right, thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is informational items. The first up is subcommittee reports. I'll just jump off since the first one is Finance Committee. Director Nelson and I, we did meet on Friday, went over the current set of invoices. We also discussed the Civic Sol contract, had some questions. So, and of course, the final product is in the agenda tonight.
And just by way of clarification, I'm still going to try for something to go to the $100 rate.
Thank you.
but the contract.
Thank you. All right, grant committee.
So we're working on the timing for the grants. Talking about how we're gonna work with our electeds to get some sort of commitment prior to voting to 218. Nothing on project management.
Okay. Technical
Yeah,
committee.
we didn't meet yet.
Okay. Next up is the general manager and district engineer comments.
Yeah, I wanted to, as I said, part of the slides that are posted out there, I did want to go back just because people are curious where things are at with the RFP, I'm sure. But there's not really a whole lot to report at all in this bunch anyway. Just as a reminder, it was released June 25th. Responses were due August 1st. We received one less response than I expected. I also expected one from WSC. In the end, they decided they don't have the bandwidth to work on it, so don't bid on it, right? But we did receive responses from Corolla, Hydroscience, Regen, RRM, Stantec, and Wallace Group. All very strong firms, all with good qualifications, all submitted a response to the RFP. So good thing is we got things to choose from. The next steps for that group is to complete the response review and rating. So we've got the criteria that were in the RFP. I put them in this slide. It's all in the RFP. This is the selection criteria we're applying. I'll note that cost is kind of a unique one. We had them submit cost in a separate file. So the reviewers, if they go to the folder that I set up for them, don't see costs. They just see everything but costs. So they can comment on readiness and demonstrated expertise and their qualifications and their timeline, but they can't rate based on cost at this juncture. Yeah, this is an RFP. We want to find the right organization and then get to a cost that is acceptable to us. It's not one where we pick the lowest bidder. Again, Public Works, this particular part of the Public Works contracting code is unique. And when it comes to things like RFP, it's even more unique because what's the name of that bill? Miller?
Little Brooks Act.
Little Brooks Act, thank you. I always get it wrong. But the Little Brooks Act helps drive how this all happens. And I suspect it had to do with people lowballing the bid to get the contract, and then 10 million change orders ensued. So now they say, no, we're going to take that out, look at your response, rate you on that, and then we'll negotiate cost once we agree to a scope. So it's a little different approach. Don't have a specific timeline for you at this juncture, but that's where we're at. We're waiting for the review and rating to complete, and then we'll get together and talk. That's that. Then, oops, sorry, wrong window. So my status report is in the agenda. I did mention that the county's financial system Workday went live. It was August 6th that it went live. Been working the RFP for the 9% design pretty heavily. And I kind of alluded to this, but have been working to obtain quotes, and we'll be working with the ad hoc committee on polling consultants and outreach consultants and so on. Another thing on the stack of things I have to do is the agreement with the city of Solving is we would take the first pass at the contract, and it would be based on roughly on what they agreed to with the CASD from San Ynez. So council and I will begin working on that at some point here in the near future. Again, a lot going on, and 30 hours doesn't go very far. Working on those things as judiciously and as quickly as possible. There are a lot of things that I'm trying to eliminate with my work anything that just burns time, that doesn't bring big value. I'll tell you, the technologies that we're using in different locations continue to be a problem. We had another problem last Friday, the finance committee and Zoom. It's like every time you go to a new location, you go, oh, I can use the same setup. No, it doesn't always work. Or they changed their Wi-Fi password, or, oh, that piece of equipment that you've drug in suddenly stopped working, even though it was working yesterday. All those sorts of things. So seriously considering, is Zoom for advisory committees really all that valuable? People can still attend, but this is the body that makes the decisions. So, we're doing Zoom tonight, and it certainly has some benefits. But for those, I spend a half hour at least just trying to set that up and break it down every meeting. And I wonder, is that really the best use of my time? I don't know. If it continues to be a problem, just know that unless I get directed otherwise, I can just say, you know what, we'll keep it here, because I know how this setup works. Things have been changing over St. Mark's in particular. They've got a director over there, so things will probably continue to change. Just know that I'm trying to keep up with all that. It's not always, technology isn't always free. So that's kind of my report. Again, I included old financial reports. I'll have Chris new ones from Workday for you in the finance subcommittee next week.
I have one comment on the agreement with solving, and that is to make sure you have conversations with the standing of CSD, the general manager and their council, and or a board member about what's worked and what hasn't in the agreement, rather than just.
I meet with their general manager regularly, so.
I'm assuming you would do that.
Yes, and I have lots of conversations. Thank you. Thank you, that was it for me.
I have nothing additional, what you covered.
Great. Next up on the agenda, director comments down the line. Okay.
Well, maybe just to respond to Mr. Savage, maybe we consider we're a small community. Maybe we just have in-person meetings. Talked about this over the time, and we have a lot going on. The last thing, if I could get a half hour of Mr. Savage to work on an RFQ on that rather than fiddling with the Zoom, then I'd rather go with that. And so I would encourage me in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. It just seems like not many people have said it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to happen. It always seems to be something breaking down.
Agreed. And you can always still available to attend.
Why don't we try looking around and put it on the next agenda?
Yeah.
Yes. Fair enough. Thank you. I definitely confirm that. All right, if there's nothing else, then next item is.
Make sure, Director
Oh,
Nelson.
sorry, Director Nelson, did you have any comments?
Yeah, actually, the only thing I've got is that it appears I will be here at least through September 30th, maybe longer. I can attend by Zoom as best I can until either another family member is able to come and step in. They're both having surgeries during this month and won't be able to be walking around or doing much. And I don't know their recovery time. So it's all, as that goes, you never know. So hopefully things will go well. But I'm right now the chauffeur gopher and taking care of things. So I appreciate the ability that I can do it by Zoom. I will say that it is difficult to hear and differentiate. I don't know what else you can do about it, but it is hard. Closed captioning might help, but it's just the way it is. So I appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Director Nelson.
Our best to Mr. Nelson and his family.
Yes, exactly. All the best to you and speedy recovery for your family. All right, with that, motion to adjourn.
We adjourn at 7:24.
We have a first and a second. It's a roll call, right? Yes.
Director Fairham.
Aye.
Director Palmer.
Aye.
President Kennedy.
Aye.
Director Parks.
Aye.
Director Nelson.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening.
Okay. It's freezing.